We'll be talking about Indus Valley Civilization. Indus Valley Civilization belongs to Bronze Age, and it had three different stages. The first one was 3300, 1300 before Common Era, the Major period, which is the second period, lasted from 2600 to 1900, and pre-Harappan cultures. Year is approximately 7500 year. As for territories, it included the rivers Indus and Sarasvati River, and Sarasvati River was included in an alternative name of the civilization. As for the countries, it included Indian subcontinent, Pakistan, northwest India, as you can see on the map, and northeast Afghanistan. And during its peak period, the total population number was 5 million. As for Indus Valley Civilization facts, the people of Indus Valley Civilization developed new handicraft techniques, which included silk carving and other techniques. They also had exchange trade system, and as for development, I would like to emphasize metallurgy, copper, bronze, lead, and tin technique development, and dancing girl, which was made with the lost wax technique. Indus Valley Civilization was a monsoon-dependent agriculture, and they had smart urban planning. What is amazing is that they used baked brick to build their houses and had architecturally complex planning, as you can see in the picture, and they had drainage and water supply systems. As for culture and linguistics, it is often compared with civilization of Mino and Crete because of the isolated cultural parallels, such as ubiquitous goddess worships and depictions of ball leaping. IBC, which is an alternative name or abbreviation for Indus Valley Civilization, corresponded to Proto-Dravidians linguistically, which is mainly South Indian culture. The breakup of Proto-Dravidian corresponds to the breakup of the late Harappan culture. Asko Parpola, who is linguist and Indologist, and he studies Indus languages, said that Sanskrit also preserved a very important part of the Indus heritage, so it was linguistically very diverse culture. Michael Witzel also suggested that prefixing language similar to Austroasiatic, notably Khasi, and these people were original inhabitants of Punjab. And also Indo-Aryans encountered speakers of Dravidian in later times. Dravidian is a language after Proto-Dravidian languages, and Indo-Aryans are the peoples of Indian and Iranian heritage. As for archaeology, Harappa was the first city to be excavated in the 1920s by Sir John Marshall. In 1926 was dancing girl discovered, and it led to different discoveries. First was that people were familiar with metal blending, casting, and etc. And as for the second, we discovered that entertainment, especially dance, was an important part of the culture. 1999, over 1,056 cities and settlements had been found, and Mohenjo is one of them, one of the 96 cities excavated, and it belongs to UNESCO World Heritage. In 1949, excavations after the independence was led by Sir Wheeler, who is advisor of the Pakistan government, so not only Indian government, but also Pakistan government was included in this. And in 2010, happened this, Haryana floods damaged one of the regions, which is Jonakera, and actually copper smelting furnaces were found, which are 5,000 years old. Archaeology, as for Dancing Girl, it is a bronze statuette from Mohenjo-daro side of the IBC, and its dimensions are 10.5 centimeters in height and width is 5 centimeters. And it is a very interesting statue and one of my favorites now because as Mortimer Wheeler said, she's about 15 years old, I should think not more, but she stands there with bangles all the way up her arm and nothing else on. A girl perfectly for the moment, perfectly confident of herself and the world. There is nothing like her, I think, in the world, and it's located in New Delhi. And as for the end of the Indus Valley Civilization, it was damaged by 10 feet water overflow from the Sutlej-Yamuna Canal. And also, as for the climate, it was monsoon-dependent agriculture, and after the monsoonal rivers dried or became seasonal, they had no more supplies for livelihood there, and they began to spread, the people of the living there began to spread into different regions, especially to the ones with more water. Yes.
The Rishis and Upanishads. Who are the Rishis? The Rishis are sages and divine human beings to whom the gods revealed certain truths, eternal truths. They're often known as seers of thought, and there's over 70 different rishis. Most of them are men, but there are some women as well. And there's 3 main types. There's the Brahmarshi, which are the highest order, or those with the mind of Brahma. There's the Devarshi, which is a slightly lower rank, and then there's the Rajarshi, which are kings who became rishis because of their exceptional knowledge and wisdom. A lot of cultures have famous philosophers and sages like that, but Indian rishis are really masters in many disciplines. Some of the most interesting and important ones are Vyasa, who compiled and authored many Hindu texts, including the Vedas, which I'll talk about in a minute. There's Charaka, who's the father of medicine, especially pharmacology. He's said to have discovered and described the medicinal functions of over 100,000 different herbs. There's Aryabhata, who's a master astronomer and mathematician, and he's said to have discovered that the world was round 1,000 years before his European counterpart. There's Patanjali, who's the father of yoga, and Vatsyayana, of course, the author of the Kama Sutra. So next are the Upanishads, which are the texts written by the rishis. They're a collection of texts that describe the central religious concepts of Hinduism, and they're considered the foundation of Hindu thought, traditions, and teachings. They consist of over 200 different texts, but the first dozen or so are the most important and the most studied, and those are known as the Mukhya. Most of the texts were written from about 800 to 300 BC, but some were written as late as the 1st century. That time period is known as the Vedic period, which was when the Vedas, which is the oldest Hindu text, was written. And that's kind of the complete basis of Hinduism. And the Upanishads are known as kind of the conclusion of the Vedas. This was a time of religious revolution where Hinduism really started to gain popularity in India. The texts describe four main principles. Sruti, which is revealed truths about the Creator, His creation, and the preservation of that. Brahman, which is ultimate reality. Atman, which is soul and self. And Moksha, which is human salvation. So overall, the sages and their texts are critical to the culture and history of Hinduism in India. Although the thing is, many of the accomplishments of the rishis and the stories described in the text may not be completely true. A lot of legends involved. But in general, everyone in the world throughout history tends to overemphasize and hyperbolize the actions and attributes of famous people. In the US, we kind of idolize the founding fathers. We kind of elevate them to a sage status for their wisdom and bravery. However, they were not that exceptional people. And just like Vyasa probably didn't write the entire Vedas by himself, and Chakara probably didn't discover 100,000 herbs, but by attributing these accomplishments to specific people, it kind of gives the Indian people someone to revere and strive to be, and it creates stories that form the identity of Hinduism in India. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Good afternoon. So the person that I was given to research, her name is Gargi Vachanavi. I'm really sorry for my pronunciation of all these names. And the title is Ancient Philosopher and Feminist. So to give you some background information, Gargi was an ancient Indian natural philosopher from a lineage of sages. Her father was well known as a philosopher. She expounded the Vedas, as Sydney said, the oldest scriptures in Hinduism. She was also known as a Brahmavadini, a person with knowledge of Brahma Vidya, which is a scriptural study in Hinduism where it aims to understand an ultimate reality. She was placed on par with her male counterparts of her time. She discussed topics like science, the illusion of time, creation of existence, really deep topics. She remained celibate for life, and she is today held in veneration by Hindus. So to give you some context, she lived during the Vedic time, so around 7th century BCE. During that time, women were respected, they were revered, seen as spiritual entities, and expected to complement their male counterparts. Gargi, however, was different because she, first of all, preached, and preaching was seen as a shunned practice by women. As I said, she expounded the Vedas, so a form of preaching. women were expected to marry and to have children. As I said before, she remained celibate for life. And she was seen as an equal to her male counterparts, but during that time, women were typically not seen as equal to men. So during my research, I came to this conclusion through the literature that Gargi was an esteemed, forward-thinking woman of her time. So it led me to ask myself, could we consider her a feminist? But before I get to that part, so what she's most known for is her participation in this competition by King Jonica, I'm going to say his name is. She was one of 9 intellectuals in his court. The king proposed this philosophical congress in which he sought to find the greatest knower of Brahman. So Gargi stepped up during this competition and challenged this great erudite. His name was Yajnavalkya, but I'm just going to call him Yaj. And during this questioning, she asked him many questions, and it revealed this really clear and intelligent mind, and her questions often confounded Yaj, which was a pretty cool feat of excellence, I should say. Yaj got kind of angered when she asked this question. I'm just going to read it out loud because it might be a little small. Gargi, do not question too much lest your head fall off. In truth, you are questioning too much about a divinity about which further questions cannot be asked. Gargi, do not over-question. So he got a little mad at her, but then after this, she declared him the winner of this competition and declared herself subordinate to him in knowledge. So this led me from a critical analysis to ask, does her loss to Yaj show her conformity to women's roles, and therefore can she be considered and called a feminist? So in case you wanted my opinion, I think that Gargi challenged the intellectual men of her time. She was really ahead of the game, and she displayed confidence in the knowledge that she herself possessed. She acknowledged her defeat with humility, which I think is a really important quality, and she also courageously faced the truth that she herself sought. I think the dialogue is also proof of the spiritual insight of which women then were capable and what women now are still capable. And I think she also taught us that winning really isn't everything. Oh, my bad. So for my conclusion, I had to redefine, look up again for myself what feminism is. So a noun, the theory of political, social, and economic equality of the sexes. So it is not women overpowering men, it is not one sex being subordinate to another sex. And I think that Gargi put herself on an equal playing field, and she considered herself equal to men, and others regarded her as equal to men. And because of her equality, she was able to declare a winner to this competition. She did it with fairness and equality, and for that reason, I'm calling her an original feminist. Thank you.
To follow Kat, but I did my presentation on Aryabhata and Brahmagupta, who were 2 Indian mathematicians and astronomers at the beginning of the Common Era. So, just to give you a brief overview on what was going on in the world of mathematics at the time, in India, Jain mathematics were playing an important role, and something that was a big component of Jain mathematics was the concept of infinity, and they discussed different orders of infinity. And then Brahmi numerals came from India, and that Brahmi numerals were developing around this time into the modern Hindu Arabic numerals that are used today. And around the world, it was the fall of the Roman Empire in the West and the start of the Middle Ages. So because of these things, mathematics started kind of taking a back seat in the European world. But in India, there was Aryabhata, who was born in 476 Common Era. And he had 2 major works, the Aryabhatiya and the Aryabhata Siddhanta, one of which, the Aryabhata Siddhanta, was lost. So the only work we have left is the Aryabhatiya, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And he had the first Indian satellite named for him in 1975. So the Aryabhatiya, it was divided into 3 sections: Ganita, which was about mathematics, the Kala Kriya, which was time calculations, and Gola, or sphere. So in his mathematics section, he named the first 10 decimal places and gave algorithms for finding square and cubic roots. He also approximated pi, so as you can see up here, 3.1416 as a ratio of those 2 numbers. In his section on time calculations, he talked about astronomy and different models of planetary motion. And in his sphere section, he was able to predict the solar and lunar eclipses, and he also explained the westward motion of the stars, which was really cool. At the time, they thought that it was the sky that was moving, but he attributed it to the Earth's movement around its axis. He also correctly explained the reasoning for lunar and planetary luminosity, that it was a reflection of sunlight. So secondly, Brahmagupta, who was born about a little over 100 years after Aryabhata, he was an Orthodox Hindu, which greatly affected his work, and he had two major works, the Brahmasputa Siddhanta and the Khandakadyaka, and he had a great influence on Islamic mathematics and astronomy as well, because a few years after he was alive, they translated his work into Arabic and brought it over to Baghdad. So his main contributions were, one, the number 0. In Aryabhata's work, he didn't use 0 as a number, but people believed he had an implicit knowledge of 0. But in Brahmagupta's work, he actually acknowledged 0 as a number and gave different rules for using 0 in mathematics, such as like adding and subtracting and multiplying 0. However, he was incorrect. He was incorrect in terms of division. He thought that if you divided by 0, you would get 0 as a quotient. He also discussed positives and negatives, which he called debts and fortunes. And because of his work with debts and fortunes, he realized that there could be dual solutions to quadratic equations, like positive and negative numbers when you square them. So for my critical analysis, I decided to ask the question, would the world be as developed as it is now if it hadn't been for these two mathematicians? And the conclusion I came to is that no, it would not have been. They both made a lot of progress that I think changed the course of the world and the course of mathematics and development in the world. And it was at a really important time where it was the start of the Middle Ages in Europe, so because mathematical thinking was taking a back seat and not as much development was happening there, I think that we owe a lot to them and what they were doing in India at this time. And I think that this mathematical development, this and scientific development is clear in a lot of the universities, especially like IIT Bombay, which we've seen on this trip, and all of the intellectual development that we see in India. So, yeah, the end.
Our presentation is on Kalidasa, who is widely regarded as the Indian Shakespeare, as he was a Sanskrit playwright and poet. He lived during the Gupta Empire. Because of the time period in which he lived in, not much is really known about him, although it was speculated that he married a princess named Vidyotama. I'm really sorry if I got the name wrong. But she pushed him to study poetry and playwriting, and it was also believed that he was possibly murdered. He wrote plays and poems, and I really don't want to try and say these, but the second one, this one right here, is considered to be one of the best literary works in Indian history. And to give you some background about the time he lived in, the Gupta Empire was founded by Maharaja Gupta, and it lasted from 320 AD to 550 AD. As Joanna said, Aryabhata and that other person came up with the concept of 0, hypothesized heliocentric models, studied lunar and solar eclipses, the Kama Sutra was written, chess was originated, so it was really prosperous golden age for India. And then to put it in a global perspective, there was a lot of invasion and a lot of religious schisms going on in Europe. As the Huns invaded Europe, St. Patrick comes back to Ireland, brings Christianity to Ireland. The first schism between the Western and Eastern churches. Justinian the Great becomes Byzantine emperor and sets up his code of laws. And then, which leads into the Middle Age for Western Europe, beginning with the plague. So the importance of Kalidasa. So Kalidasa is basically the archetype for Sanskrit literary composition. He really influenced poets such as the Bengali poet Rabindranath Tagore, who was the first non-European poet to win the Nobel Peace Prize in 1913. And then the German poet Goethe, sorry Nick if I said that wrong, he really studied Kalidasa's work, and he really enjoyed the work, quoting, "Here the poet, meaning Kalidasa, seems to be in the height of his talent and representation of the natural order," in reference to the most famous work, Abdi something, which is about this king who falls in love with this girl, and then he has to go away, and the girl insults some sage, and the sage puts a curse on her and makes the king forget about his wife until until he can find the ring that he gave her. And then through some like series of mishaps and misfortunes, he eventually finds the ring and they like come together again. It's like happily ever after. So in addition, his works were among the first Sanskrit works to be translated into English. So my personal critique. So you don't have to read all that, but I agree with this comparison, the Indian Shakespeare comparison. I really enjoy ClimateDOC's work. I think it's very beautifully written, both the poems and the plays. There's a lot of, I think he doesn't get enough merit. Everyone, and when you think of like good literary figures, you think of a lot of Western figures. You think of like Shakespeare and people during the Renaissance, but you don't really think about Eastern writers such as ClimateDOC, and I think more credit needs to be given towards him. So I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay, mine was on Buddha and Buddhism, and Buddhi, the root of Buddhism, means awakened. Okay, so who was the Buddha? The Buddha was Siddhartha Gautama, which also means the awakened one. Well, it doesn't also mean that, that's what they called him. He lived and taught in northeastern India around 400 BC. He was actually born in 563 BC in Nepal. He was born into a royal family. He was known as an enlightened teacher because he helped sentient beings end suffering, also known as dukkha in Buddhism, through elimination of ignorance and craving. His father, which he was a king, he also wanted to see his son become a king. So at age 29, he kind of rejected the materialistic lifestyle. He didn't really want to be royal. He wanted to take up spirituality, so he left the kingdom against his parents' wishes. And at 35, he meditated under the Bodhi tree. And after many days, literally meditating for many days, he achieved enlightenment just under a tree. And at age 80, he died in Kashmir, India. Okay, so some history of Buddhism and kind of what was going on in India. It rose during the kingdom of Magadha, and during the reign of the Buddhist Mauryan Emperor Ashoka, it split into two branches. And then in the 600s, it kind of lost its influence after the Gupta Empire. But it's seeing a reemergence now with like more intellectuals in India. So context continued like what was going on around the world. Also in India, there was the rise of Jainism at this time. And then ancient Greek philosophy developed, which was the foundation for Western ideology. And the Mediterranean was like a high point for architecture and art. And then the Persian Wars were also going on. Okay, so here's some basic Buddhist concepts. So the ultimate goal of Buddhism is to attain nirvana, which you can attain through the Noble Eightfold Path, which is actually what Buddha kind of like saw during his enlightenment. It's also called the middle way. So the Noble Eightfold Path helps you escape the endless cycle of suffering and rebirth. Also, for life in the world, so there are also other concepts like samsara, karma, and rebirth. Samsara rises out of ignorance and it leads to suffering. It's a continual, repetitive cycle of birth and death that arises from ordinary beings grasping and fixating on a self and experiences. Karma, I'm pretty sure you all know karma. It's that your mental intent leads to a consequence. So things that you do, actions, deeds, thoughts, everything you do plant seeds in your mind that either come to fruition during your lifetime or the next lifetime, good and bad. Also rebirth, Buddhism rejects the concept of a permanent self. So for suffering, which is like a big part of Buddhism, is escaping suffering, which is also known as dukkha. The causes and solutions can be explained by the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths are the truth of dukkha, which is the truth of suffering, the truth of the origin of dukkha, which is the origin of suffering, the truth of the cessation of dukkha, and the truth of the path leading to the cessation of dukkha. So the path is just as important. So how do Buddhists practice Buddhism? It's mostly practiced in the Himalayan regions now. Only less than 1% of India's population is Buddhist. It did have a sharp decline in the 600s, but it is going up now. There's no successor after the Buddha, and there's no text to read from, and it's non-theistic. So they don't believe in a creator deity. There are states of meditative absorption, which is kind of how you practice Buddhism and escape suffering, which include yoga, meditation, and moral purity. of thought, deed, and action. Okay, so for my critique, I appreciate the non-theistic aspects, especially for someone who isn't sure if they believe in a god or not. Buddhism is welcome to like uncertainty, and it kind of just helps you get in touch with your spiritual side. I like that it emphasizes self-control of your mind to escape suffering. I think that's really interesting for neuroscience, especially because a lot of scientists are interested in Buddhism and meditation and its effects on the brain. A lot of MRIs have been done, and it has been shown to shrink your amygdala and grow your hippocampus. Your amygdala is responsible for your fight or flight response, which is like anxiety. Okay. And
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about Jainism and the founder, Mahavira. So what is Jainism? The origins of the religion are pretty obscure just because it's such an old religion and there's not a lot of text. It's traced through the history of 24 Tirthankaras. So they're known as the teachers who have attained the highest level of consciousness. That's pretty much what the whole religion is based on. It focuses on consciousness and liberation through the means of nonviolence and like controlling oneself. So the followers of Jainism take 5 major vows: nonviolence, non-lying, non-stealing, chastity, and non-attachment, and that's seen through their eating principles. So they don't eat a lot of things. They can't eat root vegetables because they're worried about killing microorganisms in the ground. They don't drink alcohol because the fermentation process using yeast kills microorganisms in the foods that they would ferment. And then I talked a little bit about the Tirthankaras. Mahavira was the 24th and last of them, and he doesn't show it. It cut it off on the bottom, but he was born in 599 BCE. So that's pretty incredible that they still follow him from that long ago. So I'll talk about a little bit about ancient India. So they like cut off the bottom part of my slides, like there's that white
Don't do a
border.
slideshow, just do a slide.
Okay.
It's an escape. Just
Oh.
yes. Yeah.
I guess it's different on my power.
Yeah, it's maybe Windows versus Mac.
Okay, I'll just do it like this. I'll just explain the bottom. So the Vedic period.
Can you take that and maybe make it instead of 92%, make it
Yeah.
Feet.
50.
Feet. At the bottom, last, yeah.
Well, it just like put it down. Oh. So this was the time period in India when the Vedas, a couple people touched on that, was formulated. The Indo-Aryans moved into northwestern India at this point in time, and Buddhism and Jainism were the 2 thriving religions during this period. So the characteristics in India of this period in time, it was a tribal and pastoral society, but then it started transforming into more of an agricultural society with social classes, and also had more of a government. The end of this period saw the rise of more of an urbanized environment, and at this point Hinduism started to arise as well. This was also a thriving part in the whole, thriving time in the whole world. In China, there was the Zhou dynasty. This was the largest and longest dynasty in Chinese history, and there was an increase in metal making, and also written language started to develop in China. In ancient Greece, it was the Archaic period, which saw the rise of city-states and more like literary aspects. In ancient Rome, they started organizing themselves a little bit more. The first census was taken right around 578 BC, and it defined the boundaries of Rome and also formally divided the empire. So the lasting message, Jainism is one of the oldest religions in the world and also one of the oldest religions in India. It preaches nonviolence, and that kind of, you can see that in all the religions that are dominant in India through like Buddhism and Hinduism. It raises the importance of individual awareness and how the individual has an impact of the world around him/her. They say once you reach the highest level of consciousness, you dissolve, and it only leaves behind your hair and toenails. So there's Mahavir was said to just have dissolved, which was actually in Bangalore. So there's only about 4.2 million Jains in India and only about 10,000 in the US, so it is kind of a dying religion at this point. And in my critical analysis, that's mostly due to the fact that it's extremely strict and a really complex religion. It's really hard to kind of get involved. It's mostly just passed down through family traditions. And also not much is known about the history of this religion just because it wasn't written down. But because even though those things are part of the religion, it still played a huge role in the movement of people into northwestern India and also helped develop the culture. It's one of the cornerstones of Indian culture as well as has its hand in Hinduism and Buddhism. And that's my presentation.
Hi, so I'm talking about Alexander the Great and his interaction with India. So first of all, I'm going to sort of start with, by the end of his campaigns, this region was what he ended up with. I'm also going to talk about the Gangaradai, which at that time was ruled by the Nanda dynasty Gangaradai is here, and then the Magadha, which was ruled by the Nanda dynasty, which was right here. So just to give you sort of context for the location and how the borders of those three areas were. So first a little about the Gangaradai. It was a smaller one. It's an ancient state that was, at least according to historical records, existed at least around 300 BC, located where the Bengal region lies today, in present-day Bangladesh. Also, they had regions about the Ganges River, which, as we know, is important for civilization because you need the water for that. So it has great access to water. And at the time, we also knew that it had a strong and large population where, and in the interactions with the Greeks, which there was some, and their historians recorded at one estimate that he was rumored to have an army of 20,000 horses. You can read that, but basically a large and threatening army. So clearly with a large army typically goes along with a strong, thriving society. There's also the Magadha Empire, which was ruled by three dynasties that we know of. First the Yankan dynasty, then the Shishanaga dynasty, and then the Nanda dynasty. I'm going to be focusing more on this time period, around 330 to 320 BC. And also in that empire, as Will just spoke about, that's when Jainism became strong. Buddhism also was rising, and they both had beliefs in rebirth and karmic retribution, and they were in that sort of state of mind. So what happened with Alexander's, he came to power after his father Philip died. His father Philip was also going on a lot of conquests, and Alexander grew up in that sort of spirit of conquering the world and believing that that was their right and what they wanted to do. However, his father was assassinated, so like any good person who comes to power, when his father was assassinated, he started by removing other people who could come to power. So he kind of ordered the executions of family members who could challenge his authority or who might not have liked him being king, so that he wouldn't be kicked out. And he also gave certain command posts to other generals who he found more trustworthy rather than the military generals who were in place there, to sort of secure his power. So then he wanted to go on his conquest campaign and conquer the world. So he suppressed revolts on the northern borders of the Balkans, and then he conquered the Persian Empire. He went through Egypt, he went through Syria, he went through all of those places that you could see on the map. And then he got to India. So when he entered India, he invited some of the tribes or chieftains in North Pakistan. He said, hey, you can submit to my rule now and we won't fight. Some of them agreed, and then he left them in power and then gave them gifts for being under his control, which was one of the things he did as an intelligent leader of a large area so that the leaders were content. But then some of the other chieftains didn't, and he ended up fighting some bloody battles against them. So it got kind of rough. However, one thing I didn't mention was that he also stopped when he got to the Nanda Empire and the Gengaradai because their armies were so large and powerful that the men refused to try to conquer India. So that's when they swerved over towards the Middle East and Africa. So the legacy that he left behind is that because of the conquest that he did, wherever he went, he sort of blended the culture. So there was a lot of Greek-Persian culture that was spread into India, into the areas that he conquered. There was also a mixing of Greek elements in things, and a lot of syncretism seen in modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan. So a lot of those effects, Greco-Buddhism, Buddhist traditions, sculptures, astronomy, were kind of just fused at this time period throughout that area. That's all.
Okay, so today I'm going to be presenting over Emperor Ashoka, sometimes known as Ashoka the Great. He lived from 304 to 232 BCE. So his rule began in 273 BCE and lasted until his death in 232. He inherited the throne from his brother because Ashoka from an early age showed prowess both as a warrior and a hunter, and whereas his brother didn't. So at the time of his father's death, he made a daring power grab to take the throne. The beginning of Ashoka's reign was marked by two different types of military feats. One was the brutal suppression of revolts, and two was the conquest of additional land. The last of which was the conquest of Kalinga in eastern India, roughly about the last part of the Indian subcontinent that Ashoka didn't already have under his control. This conquest of Kalinga rendered about 10,000, 20,000 people dead. These are men, women, and children. And after it was over, Ashoka renounced war forever and adopted and converted to Buddhism. So the second part of his reign, when Ashoka was a Buddhist, is the part that he's really revered for and remembered for today. These include such philanthropic works as construction of hospitals and watering sheds, supplying medicine, and all of the rest. And that does not even begin to touch all of the different types of innovative and visionary things he did for his people. The Edicts of Ashoka are a really powerful construction that he did, where he, at different places in his empire, he created giant stone scriptures of what he liked to call the Dharma, or what Buddhists call law. And that's where he just preached morality and acceptance. And so upon his death, that is really the tragic part. So as soon as he died, the Maurya Empire went into a state of decay. After he died, his public works were stopped, the Maurya Empire collapsed, and he was really lost to the ages. So I've already told you about the Maurya Empire that Ashoka inherited. But the state of the world at the time of his death was, Alexander the Great had, his empire was starting to collapse upon his death, which opened up western India for the Maurya Empire to overtake. So Mongolia was at the height of its power. China was nearing the end of its warring states period, and Rome was preoccupied and no longer worried about India because they had to deal with Carthage. So people always talk about how much of a great philanthropist Ashoka was and how visionary he was for his time. But I wanted to look at what made him so great and what opportunities did he have. Well, because he already inherited such a large empire and brutally crushed all resistance, he really had the luxury and the time to be great. And also, you have to really look at, did he do it out of the kindness of his heart, or did he do it because all of the different places that make India so diverse, he had to please all of them so that they would not revolt against him as they did in the beginning of his reign. And also, at the beginning of his reign, Ashoka, before he converted to Buddhism, owned various torture palaces, one the most famous of which was known as Ashoka's Hell. So if another person who was not a world leader did something so terrible, we would probably only remember them for that thing. So it really begs the question of whether or not we should analyze him for the individual things he did or his visionary ideas. So breaking away from really criticizing him, there are many, many things we can gain from learning what Ashoka did as a ruler. On the religious front, he was able to be passionate in what he loved, but also tolerant of others. As a role model, he was tolerant, caring, and understanding of of all of the people in his empire, and he was able to bring unity where there was such a divide before he took the throne. Thank you.
Well, if we have been completely avoiding each other this entire dialogue and you don't know, my name is Rachel. Yeah, and I'll be talking to you today about Chandragupta II. So, some basics really quickly. Chandragupta's full name is Vikramaditya Chandragupta II. He was named after his grandfather, and he was famous because he was one of the main emperors and very successful emperor during the Gupta Empire. And he reigned specifically from 380 to 415 CE, and he was the son of Samudragupta and Datta Devi. So, quickly, I want to explain his significance and his legacy, and he was a very successful leader for three main reasons. He was a very strong militant emperor, and for that he had conquered 21 kingdoms during his campaign. That's a picture of it there on that map. And he ruled a kingdom that is described from like the mouth of the Ganges to the mouth of the Indus River and to the Narmada River. Now, another reason why he was very successful was because he hired the 9 gems to work in his court. And I think this is what makes him very distinct as a leader, because this was this emphasis. It was these 9 experts and 9 respected people that he had in his kingdom. And they were astrologists and sculptors and architects and philosophers. And he hired them all to have this collaborative combining of ideas within his court. And he encouraged them to publish papers or write papers and just to throw ideas around with each other and just really encourage forward thinking within the Gupta Empire during this time. Now, he also encouraged prosperity. He was the first he emphasized producing gold and silver coins. And also it was recorded that there was no capital punishment or poll tax or land tax within the empire at this time. Now, Faxian, who was a traveler from China who went around to different countries and different empires during this time and wrote down his experiences, he talked about the area as a kind of almost utopian sort of society, and he said that it was very rich and prosperous. Now, Gupta agreed with this himself and thought that it was such a great area that he decided towards the end of his life to make this massive iron pillar, which still stands in Delhi today. That's like his own contributing to how great of a job he did himself. Now, I want to explain how this is going on, what was going on in India. As you can kind of tell, he had a very successful reign, such that it was known as the golden age during India because of all of this military expansion, but then also this cultural revolution that was going on. Now, in the world, it's kind of interesting because during this time, Christianity was being adopted into the Roman Empire, but the Roman Empire was also slowly starting to decline as there was more internal fighting, division of the empire, and struggles just to have proper communication between both ends of the empire. That was also the final rulers of the Han Empire during that time in China, and as we've talked about, Buddhism was actually starting to slowly expand, also around the region of China. And then also the Mayan Empire was building the North Acropolis, which is in that picture right there. So to keep your attention, just for a little while longer, as I was doing research, I thought it was very necessary to explain why Chandragupta is a bro, because you don't take no sass from nobody. And early in his life, Chandragupta had a wonderful lover named Devi, and like all brothers, they fight. And so, of course, Ramagupta, who was Chandragupta's older brother, took his lover for his own and, of course, had the kingdom. Now, Ramagupta was not as cool of a person, so he faced a defeat from the Saka Empire. And so, from that defeat, the ruler of the Saka Empire demanded Devi. And so, Ramagupta was going to hand over Devi. Chandragupta was not a fan of this, and so he disguised himself as a woman, naturally, and he disguised himself as a woman, and then he went and he killed the ruler, and then he killed his brother, and then he took his girl back. So it's a story of inspiration to live up to. Well, please don't live up to him. So some perspective with all of this, I thought it was very interesting that during this time of decay within the world with the Roman Empire, Chandragupta was able to bring a golden era to India. So I thought it was interesting that although his military and his empire was not the largest, he certainly had a good handle of things within the country that he had. He emphasized the arts during this time. He tried to unite them by having coins being made so that they were all kind of on the same page, like economically, and he really brought a lot of strength to India. So he certainly started early on in his life with perseverance and confidence, dressing as a woman and taking back his girl. And I think he was a very successful ruler. Thank you.
So I'm going to be talking about Harshavardhana today. He lived in India from 590 to 647 AD. And just to give you some context about the time, it was kind of a period of political instability because the Gupta Empire had just fallen in India. So instead of one empire, northern and central India was divided into these separate states and kingdoms among which there was some tension, and then also in the west there was the fall of the Roman Empire. So Harshavardhana came in and he united the small republics from Punjab to central India, so his empire had spanned this area that you can see right here. He ruled from 606 to 647 when he died. He was the heir to the Pushyabhuti dynasty. I don't know how to say that, but he established his empire through a strong military. He was only defeated once when he tried to extend his empire into the southern peninsula of India, and that was essentially his downfall. So some of his contributions to the Indian society, number one, his economy was focused a lot on self-sufficiency, and that's why Indian feudalism is often coined with Harshavardhana. So he focused a lot on self-sufficiency, and that gave rise to agriculture and subsistence farming, which in turn led to a decline in external trade within the empire. He was a Mahayana Buddhist, and so he built statues throughout his empire in the name of Buddha. But although he promoted Buddhism, he was tolerant of all faiths. He established diplomatic relations with China, which was at the time under the Tang dynasty, so he sent a mission to China, which is considered to be the first diplomatic relations between the two countries. And there was a man named Xuan Zhuang, who was a Chinese diplomat who came and resided in his empire for several years. He's well known, and he wrote about his time in India in his published works. And finally, Harshavardhana promoted art and literature in his empire, so he was a writer himself, and he wrote 3 Sanskrit plays which are well known, and he gave several endowments to the University of Nalanda, and as a result of the promotion of education and art and literature in his empire, his reign is very well documented. So some of the things that I think were very good about his leadership were that he first of all united the separate kingdoms in northern and central India. He did this using a strong military, but still his reign was noted, it was associated with a time of peace in the area, which can be seen from his religious tolerance as well as his diplomatic relations with other countries such as China. In addition, he promoted art and literature within his kingdom, stimulating education and growth. However, I think that his emphasis on feudalism and self-sufficiency was not overall positive because it led to a decline in external trade in his empire. So there used to be all of these trading centers, and then when he took over, those kind of disappeared. And I think that that might be part of the reason why a lot of people in India still depend on subsistence farming as heavily as they do today. And in addition, he tried to overextend his empire, which essentially led to his downfall. So it's kind of hard to talk about his legacy because when he died, his empire kind of died with him, and the region reverted back to the smaller separate states as it had been beforehand, and they were subject to a lot of external invasions. And as a result, the following period is very poorly documented, and also the relations that he worked to forge with China were compromised because the Chinese ruler sent a group of visitors to India thinking that he was still the king, and the new ruler in the area captured the visitors, and when they finally managed to escape, they were so mad, so they launched an attack on India from Nepal and Tibet. So those relations were pretty much ruined. So basically, I think that Harshavardhana was a good ruler. I think he had positive contributions to the Indian society. However, they were not lasting because his empire died when he did. And things kind of went back to the way they were before, if not worse. So yeah, that's all I have.
I'm talking about the Pala Empire. And they were a Buddhist imperial power during classical India from the 8th to 12th century Common Era. And they're mostly in the Bengal-Bihar region, which is present-day Bangladesh and eastern India. So in this map over here, they're empire that's in purple, and the other empires that were sort of big at the time in this period in classical India were the Gujaras, which are the green, and then the Rashtrakutas, which are the orange, and they're in the south. And the thing that's really interesting about the Pala empires is that they rose out of this period of anarchy following the decline of King Shansaka, and there was an entire century of anarchy following his fall, and that's how the Pala Empire started. And they had a lot of very important contributions, which I'll talk about later, to art, temples, universities, and they had a really big influence in the region on trade and culture. So the first main important person is Gopala, and he was the first ruler of the Pala Empire. And what's interesting to note, it's called the Pala Empire, and all of the rulers of the Pala Empire end their name in Pala, which means protector in the local language of the empire. And like I said before, there was this period of chaos following the fall of King Shansaka, and there was no central authority in this part of India during that time. And so the people had a very big fear of invasion because there was no government, no central authority to protect them. And so the chieftains, after a century of this anarchy, they got together and they decided to elect Gopala, and he was sort of accepted without question from all the other chieftains, and he was the first democratically elected leader in the Bengal region, which is really interesting to note, and something I think is really cool. And Gopala created a lot of peace in the region, so he was able to bring together all of these different parts, created peace, and he was able to expand the reach of the empire. And he left the state in a very prosperous state for the empire to his son Dharmapala and his grandson Devapala. And Dharmapala invaded and took over a lot of northern India, so he expanded the rule even farther than it had previously been, and he had a policy of religious tolerance, which is something I'm going to talk about a little bit later, but I think it's really interesting to note that even though he was a Buddhist ruler and the Pala Empire was Buddhist, they were very religiously tolerant of all other religions. And so Dharmapala ruled for 32 years, and then he left it to his son Devapala, which he is known as the most powerful and vigorous Pala ruler. He successfully fought off the Huns and the Gujaras from the western side. He ruled for 40 years, but there was a sort of a problem with who would be his successor, and so when he died, it sort of signaled the end of the ascendancy of the Pala dynasty. But a bunch of years later, Mahipala was able to come back into power and was able to recover a lot of the land that was lost after Devapala's death, and it was a period of social peace. And so Mahipala was able to have a lot of public welfare activities, which made him very popular. But when he tried to regain the peace and the prosperity that the empire had once known, he failed, and after he died, the Pala Empire fell into decline and never recovered. So some of their major achievements, they were very successful at invading and conquering, like I said before. Many universities flourished under their rule, and the Arabs called them the most benevolent rulers in all of India, which I think comes from the fact that they were very religiously tolerant. They were very kind and compassionate to their own people, not to the people they invaded, but to others. And they had these vast trade networks. Some of their important contributions to society came from the social peace. So because there was no fighting within the empire, because of religion and things like that, they were able to be great patrons to the arts. The Pala School of Structural Art is something that they're very well known for. Their architecture styles, art, literature, learning, and they created the Somapura Mahavihara, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and that's a picture of it on the right. And lastly, I wanted to look at sort of their religious tolerance and what it meant. I think that because of their Buddhist philosophy, they were able to be tolerant of all Hindus and everyone else in their all the other religions in their region, and Hindu gods and Brahmins from the Hindu religion were able to hold high-ranking positions in the empire, which is very different from places like Rome and things like that, where it was only Christians who were allowed to hold positions, and all other religions were sort of squashed. And so, those are my sources.
Shankara. So first of all, a little bit of background information He was born in the 8th century CE. He was born in a village here in Kerala, by the way, Karati. That's the village he was born in. His father died when he was young, which complicated things, his education mostly. There's a famous story that says that, well, Shankara was interested in becoming a hermit. So there's this famous story that he goes to a river with his mother to take a bath, to bath, and then he was caught by a crocodile. And he called out to his mother and he asked her to let him become a sannyasin, or else the crocodile would kill him. His mother agrees, and Shankara is freed and he leaves to find his education. So he reaches a sanctuary, Saivite, and becomes a disciple of Govindapada. He traveled around India and participated in a lot of philosophical debates. He debated different orthodox schools of Hinduism, Buddhism, Jains, Aratas, Sagatas, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing the things right. And he died at the age of 32, so pretty young. Why is he important? Well, he was a Hindu philosopher and theologian from India. He is believed to be the organizer of the Dashanami monastic order and the founder of the Shamara tradition of worship. He explained the key distinction between Hinduism and Buddhism. So, Hinduism basically asserts that there's a soul, there's a self, Atman. While the Buddhism asserts that there is no soul, that there is no self. I'll talk a little bit more about this, because, well, he's also most renowned exponent of the Advaita Vedanta. What is the Advaita Vedanta? The Advaita Vedanta is an ancient Hindu tradition and religious practice. It's the recognition that the true self, Atman, is the same as the highest reality, Brahman. Followers seek liberation by acquiring Vidya, which is knowledge of Atman and Brahman. So I talked about the difference between Hinduism and Buddhism. In Hinduism we have moksha. Moksha is a liberating realization that I am everything, that acceptance of self and universal soul, that myself is everything and everything is also part of me. Well, in Buddhism we have nirvana, which is part of it is a liberating realization and acceptance that there is no self or consciousness. So it's so these are two completely different meanings. What is his legacy? His legacy is that he has over 300 texts, the Advaita Vedanta school of Hinduism. His doctrine has been the source for modern Indian thought. So what he wrote about is still very relevant to Indians today. He maintained the need for objectivity in the process of gaining knowledge, which is, to me, very surprising because, you see, the Enlightenment in Europe, we have it until the 1600s, 1700s, and right here he is already far beyond that. He's thinking about philosophy. He's thinking that we need objectivity in the knowledge. We need not just to believe what they tell us. And something that I also found very interesting is that he discourages the ritual worship, such as obligations to God, because in his text Upadesa Sahasri, he basically says that the doctrine of difference is wrong, because he who knows Brahman is one, and he is another does not know Brahman. So you shouldn't be, in his mind, worshipping a god, like even the doctrine of difference. So he also introduced the Pansayatana form of worship, which is basically you're worshipping 5 gods at the same time, and all these deities are different forms of Brahman. And finally, this is what I like most about him. So there's this famous story that when he lived, he was 8 years old. He was wandering near the Himalayas, and he found a guru, Gaudapada. And Gaudapada asked him, "Who are you?" And he responded with this song. Can you play? Yeah. I'll just play a part of the song. And if you read all the lyrics, it's longer than this, but it's very deep. And there's a lot of and finally, Gaudapara says, okay, I'll take you, and he becomes his guru. And that's
My presentation's on two universities, Nalanda and Taxila, and I'm going to talk about the rise and fall of both of them. So, some of the first universities were made because they were looking for an environment for scholars, and these first universities provided that. Eastern universities, they were sponsored by different people like courts, religious institutions, scientific institutions, which are like hospitals and museums, and also individual scholars. And this is different from the typical Western style university that we're used to because they are affiliated, because Eastern style universities were affiliated with so many sponsors, and they are also religiously affiliated. So the first university, Taxila or Taxila University, historians disagree a lot on when it started. Some say it dated back to 5th century, others say 6th, and I actually found things that said the 8th century BC. So this makes it the world's oldest university, and students there's an individualistic basis, so they each had their own paths of learning, and they were each doing different things. There weren't like set curriculums. And this university was Hindu and a Buddhist center. So the end of Taxila happened in 499 AD, and it happened when it was attacked by white Huns. And just a little about these white Huns is that they were from Central Asia, and they were traveling from between Tibet and Tashkent. They were a nomadic tribe, and they practiced polyandry, which is when one woman has many husbands. And historians believe that this happened because that they attacked this university because there was a hatred towards Buddhism for Huns at this time, and that they were trying to get rid of Buddhism, but obviously it did survive under Hun rule. And historians say that this was attributed, the loss of Indians' scientific thought on different things like astrology, philosophy, mathematics is because of the destruction of these universities and later universities. So there could have been discoveries that happened that we have no record of and that we don't know about now. So the second university, Nalanda University, is started around 427 AD. It was founded by Gupta kings, and it was in northeastern India. So right now it's like we're the southern border of Nepal. And this university was very prestigious. Students came from all over. They came from Tibet, Korea, China, Japan, and it was a Buddhist center of learning. There's over 10,000 students and over 2,000 teachers, and it was the first university to have dormitories for the students. So Nalanda had the largest library of the ancient world. There was 9 stories, 3 different buildings, and it had thousands and thousands of manuscripts on hundreds of different topics. Nalanda University lasted for 800 years, and then in the late 12th century, during the Muslim invasion of India, a Turkish invader, Bakhtiar Khilji, with a Muslim army attacked Nalanda because they thought it was a fort of an empire, and so this threatened them. And they burned the library and killed thousands of monks who were inside, and people say that there's records show that this library burned for 3 months after the attack. So for my insight, I want to talk a little more about modern times because they've reconstructed Nalanda University, and I read an interview of the vice chancellor, and she said that they were trying to focus on looking at those cores, the core goals of the original university, like it's focused on excellence and prestige, and also she said they were trying to be cutting edge applying the cutting edgeness of the first university and bringing that to modern times. And there's also there was a lot of foreign support to rebuild this university, so different countries helped sponsored it. And I thought this was incredibly interesting because like there's not a lot of support in money, and the fact that education brought these countries together is really powerful because the countries realize that no matter where their people are being educated, no matter if it's in a different country, that it still benefits them.